Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Linux and open source news. This week we have Linus Torvalds talking about Rust in the kernel and basically dismissing all the concerns from current Rust haters that do not want Rust in the Linux kernel. We also have Mozilla killing their Mastodon instance after about a year and a half, and we're going to talk about why it's really not a problem. And we also have the release of GNOME.47, the Linux kernel 6.11, Microsoft making some moves towards adopting Vulkan's shader model, and a bunch of other things. So let's dive in right after I tell you about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They offer a lot of solutions to ensure that your Linux machines stay up to date and secure with as little downtime and manual maintenance as possible. For example, they offer automated live patching services for your Linux kernels on all popular distros, so you don't have to reboot or to cause disruptions to get the latest security updates. They also have extended support for end-of-life Linux distros, for software languages, and software development tools like Spring, so you can push back your migration date for years without being exposed. And they also have commercial support for Alma Linux. Speaking of which, they now offer a pretty interesting bundle if you were thinking about migrating your CentOS machines, which are likely now end of life, to something else. You can now migrate to Alma Linux seamlessly from CentOS and then get enterprise support for Alma Linux with extended security updates and enhanced support with access to Alma Linux experts through pay-as-you-go bundles of 5, 10 or 20 hours. You can purchase licenses online straight from their website, so head over to the link in the description to get started with that. So, Linus Torvalds gave another talk with his usual discussion partner at the Linux Foundation's Open Source Summit Europe, talking about kernel development, Rust in the kernel, and the usual topics. And on the topic of Rust, Torvalds says that some arguments can currently get very nasty, as some developers and maintainers just want nothing to do with that language and will repeatedly say that it has failed already in terms of accomplishing goals in the Linux kernel, and so it shouldn't be used. Like Torvalds says, this discussion is now taking almost religious overtones, which is always a bad thing, at least when you're not discussing religion, because, well, you're talking about beliefs and not facts, and beliefs have nothing to do in a technical conversation. Torvalds still remains optimistic, saying that Rust is a very different beast to C, and that if people don't like the differences between the two, it's okay. He's saying no one understands all the parts of the Linux kernel, not even Torvalds himself, and as such, no one is expected to use Rust or to read the parts written in Rust if they don't want to interact with those. He also said that it's only been a few years since they started implementing Rust here and there in the kernel, and that it is way too early to say if that integration has been a failure. So as far as I can tell, this is an unusually polite way for Linus Torvalds to tell all those Rust in the kernel haters to sit down and let the grown-ups work. Now, he also talked about maintainers going grey, and generally the old guard of the kernel aging, which prompts the conversation, is it time to prepare a replacement for Torvalds himself? And he says that people aging and dropping out of the kernel is normal. What isn't normal is people staying on for decades. And the fact that this is happening for the Linux kernel is a good sign, because it means that the project is healthy. As per preparing a replacement, Torvalds says that the current backup is Greg Coher-Hartman, someone who's been around for a very long while as well, and that after him there are other people lined up who have been there for a long time. Basically, the plan is just have a series of top maintainers that have contributed for a long time, are well known from the community, and you won't have an issue with these people being accepted when the time comes for one of them to step up. Let's just hope we don't end up with a Alexander the Great's generals situation when Torvalds decides to step down, where every top maintainer thinks it's their time to shine, and it ends up hurting the community or fragmenting it. I don't think this really could happen with the Linux project. It's too important and apparently too well managed for that, but it's sure that the day where Torvalds retires and stops working on the kernel is going to feel pretty weird. Now, just like Google has its graveyard, Mozilla also has theirs. Admittedly, not as filled as Google, but also they don't have as much financing. They just added one more thing to it. Mozilla.social, their Mastodon instance. It was announced at the end of 2022, it got out of its beta phase in May 2023, and it will now be shut down in December this year on the 17th after a year and a half of being open. Users, of course, can download their data and migrate their account to another instance because it's Mastodon, it's meant to let you do that. Mozilla.social never got big, it only has 270 active users currently, which is nothing compared to a lot of other Mastodon instances. For example, Mastodon.social has more than 240,000 users. For some people, this is a negative because, well, Mastodon and the Fediverse is supposed to be decentralized, so having one giant instance where you have about 10% of all of Mastodon's users is not necessarily the goal, but yeah, 270 users for Mozilla is really tiny. Now, this move from Mozilla is likely the continuation of their current strategy, which can be summed up as let's stop investing in 10 different small products with not enough efforts and thus waste resources. Let's just focus on the core stuff like Firefox. Mozilla said it was a hard decision to shut this instance down, but it is not an unexpected decision. And you know what? I really want to yell at Mozilla to stop trying to build things and abandon them a year later. They built a ton of cool stuff that I used. Mozilla Prism, which was basically PWAs before PWAs existed. They had Lockwise, a fantastic password manager that I used on Android for a while. They had Firefox Send, which I used to send large files. They had Firefox Hello, which was basically Jitsi Meet but from Mozilla. I liked those things, and they killed them all because they never really invested enough time or efforts to make them into really viable products for them. But at the same time, Firefox needs that investment. It needs those improvements to stay relevant. So yeah, you need to invest in that. Mozilla.social was a nice effort, but it was utterly unimportant, and it being killed is really not a big deal. Now, the Linux kernel 6.11 was released over the weekend. And it will be the version that gets shipped in Ubuntu 24.10 and probably in Fedora 41 as well. This one is pretty packed in the drivers department. Surprise, it's a kernel, it has drivers. There's support for AMD Core Performance Boost, meaning that recent AMD CPUs should be able to better make use of Turbo for each of their individual cores, so more efficiency for AMD CPUs. There's also support for AMD Fast CPCC, which is a feature that can give from 2 to 6% better performance without using more power, at least on Zen 4 CPUs. For Intel, there's better support for their brand new Lunar Lake architecture, and there's also support for the NPUs that started appearing in recent Intel chipsets, so the AI chips. The kernel now is able to profile the use of this chip, and it has a scheduler to correctly attribute tasks to it. ARM support is also improved here, with the Snapdragon 850 SoC being supported, as well as the first bricks for supporting the Snapdragon Elite X1 from Qualcomm, although this is still lacking a lot of stuff, notably USB. More drawing tablets were supported, there are plenty of other changes like a boost to X4 performance of about 20% on fast SSDs, you've got better FS recovery support, you've got the ability to display a monochrome logo when you're experiencing a kernel panic, so distros can make that screen look a bit less jarring, and there's more keyboard backlight support for Touch Bar MacBooks, and a bunch of other things. This kernel version should have something for everyone, provided you can actually get your hands on it, because a lot of distros just don't give you the latest version of the kernel until you actually upgrade to a newer version of the distro. So if you're using Ubuntu LTS, you will get it through the hardware enablement stack, as far as I know. You will also get it on the latest version of Ubuntu, non-LTS. You'll get it on Fedora. Other distros, you'll have to wait to see if that happens. Now, of course, we also got the release of GNOME 47 this week. No distro probably has it already, or very few of them, but it's coming soon to a system near you. And I already made a dedicated video about all the new stuff in GNOME 47. If you want the details, go watch that on YouTube or PeerTube. But if you want the TLDR, you have accent colors that currently don't really work with any other apps than the default pre-installed GNOME ones, at least until GNOME apps update to the latest libadwaita release, and something is unlocked for KDE apps as well. Currently, they don't use that accent color. You also get experimental Wayland HDR support, still hidden behind the command line and only for Vulkan apps. You get a new Vulkan-based renderer for GTK, you have hardware encoding for the screen recorder, you've got support for VR headsets under Wayland, and plenty of changes to the default apps, notably using Nautilus as the open or safe dialog, so things will be a lot more featureful than they once were in that area. Calendar received a lot of love, online accounts get much better at auto-discovering your settings when creating an account, and plenty of things linked to accessibility and the Sovereign Tech Foundation project have been added in GNOME 47 but not enabled. They will truly be usable in GNOME 48 or GNOME 49. So it is a transition release with the only really visible change being some dialogues being reworked and the addition of accent colors and a few things here and there in the Nautilus area or file picker area. The rest is just under the hood changes, but they are really big ones that will improve everyone's experience, and there are plenty of performance improvements in there as well, which should make GNOME much more efficient and much smoother to use. So obviously if you use GNOME, you want this version, just wait for your distro to ship it. We also have interesting news coming from Microsoft. It looks like DirectX 12, their graphics API that virtually every PC game uses, will adopt Spear V as the format for their shaders. Or is it Spear 5? Because you say RISC 5. I don't really know. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I'm gonna say Spear V here. Now trust me bro, this is an interesting move. This format is the standard defined by the Kronos group, who is the steward of the competing Vulkan API. And Spear V shaders are also used with OpenGL and OpenCL. And not only will DirectX 12 support these shaders, they will also replace their own shader format, DXIL, with Spear V. As Microsoft says it, maintaining a proprietary format for this is counter to their commitment to open technologies. Which you're gonna have to point me to where this commitment has been defined anywhere, because Microsoft has never really committed to any really open technologies apart from the ones they developed and then sort of open. But in this case, apparently yes, they want to use the open standard. They will also implement extensions to the format so it can support all of DirectX's current and future capabilities. They will also build tools to translate their previous format to Spear V and vice versa. And when you heard the word extensions, you probably started thinking about embrace, extend, extinguish, but I don't think this is going to happen here. First, because Microsoft doesn't really need to extinguish Vulkan at all, because Vulkan isn't really a competing standard to DirectX 12, either on Xbox or on PC gaming. Virtually everyone relies on DirectX 12. Virtually no one only relies on Vulkan, so not really a problem for them. And also, the Kronos group is spearheaded and funded by companies that are equally as big and powerful as Microsoft. There's Google, there's Apple, there's IBM, there's Intel, there's AMD, there's Nvidia. They're not gonna let Microsoft monopolize yet another graphics standard, so I don't think this will happen. So probably what's happening is Microsoft realizing that maintaining their own shader format brings them absolutely no advantage, but for us Linux users it might mean less shader recompilation from what the games have already compiled. Currently they can compile shaders for DirectX 12 and then DXVK needs to recompile those for Vulkan. Maybe if we have the same exact format, we don't need the second extra step, and so we have less performance penalties, less stuttering, and less loading times as well. And to conclude on Linux gaming, we also have some bad news here, because Rockstar is now moving to BattlEye for its anti-cheat, and they apparently don't want to enable Linux support for it, even though it would be absolutely feasible, meaning that GTA Online is now not on the cards anymore for us Linux users, and Valve actually downgraded its compatibility from playable to, well, unsupported. Rockstar mentioned Linux in an FAQ saying that the Steam Deck doesn't support BattlEye for GTA Online, which is misleading at best and a blatant lie at worst, because BattlEye does have a Linux version, and as far as I know they also have a version for Windows that can support Proton, so it's not the Steam Deck that doesn't support BattlEye for GTA Online. It's GTA Online that doesn't support the Steam Deck in its implementation of BattlEye. Don't reverse the problem here, Rockstar. They also said that GTA 5 and GTA Online were never officially supported on the Steam Deck, which is fair, they never did say that they were supporting this platform, and as such they will not take any tech support questions, they should all be directed to Valve. Now, the single player will of course still work on Linux, but the still very popular multiplayer won't, which kinda sucks. Personally, I never played GTA 5 online because it's really not my jam at all, but it looked pretty fun for people who were interested in that thing, and so it always sucks when you lose access to something that you had previously, especially since we could have kept that access with just one click in a checkbox from Rockstar, which, again, they decided not to do for probably very dubious cheating reasons that have never really been proven anywhere by any game developer as far as I know. Anyway, if you like GTA 5 online, you just can't play it on Linux anymore, and that's really sad. Just like it would be really sad to end this video without this message from our sponsor. It's Tuxedo computers. You all know about them by now. I've been just talking and talking about them at the end of every video for the past like 2 or 3 years, which should prove how committed I am to telling you how good they are. I've been working with them for I think the longest of any of my sponsors. They make desktops and laptops that ship with Linux pre-installed. All the hardware is tested for the best Linux compatibility, and even if their patches haven't been accepted upstream yet to support all that hardware, they have repos you can add to other distros than the ones that they ship by default, so you can actually get that support as well on other systems. I only use Tuxedo computers these days. They have a range that will fit every need and every price point. All my videos, all my podcasts, everything are done. All my videos, all my podcasts, everything is done on one of their laptops with a dedicated GPU, and all of my gaming is done on Linux on one of their Tuxedo Cubes, which is a relatively small form factor PC. If you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, you want to make sure the computer really supports Linux well, and you want to support a company that actually contributes to Linux, click the link in the description below and check them out. Anyway, this will conclude this video. Thank you all for watching it. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Plenty of cool buttons underneath the video so you can tell YouTube that it's good and people can watch it and discover the channel. And if you really enjoyed the channel, all the links are in the description just as well. You'll get some really cool perks by doing that. It's honestly probably the best value for money Patreon out there in tech. You get so much for $1 per month. Check it out. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one next week. Bye!